The scars began the night Eleanor Whitmore refused to marry Jacob Pritchard, and by morning, the entire town of Silverton, Nevada, would whisper that she belonged to no one but the devil himself. It was the spring of 1876, and Eleanor had just turned 19 when Jacob cornered her in her father's barn, a hunting knife glinting in the lamplight. She had known Jacob since childhood, had trusted him once, but the man who stood before her that night wore madness like a second skin. He spoke of ownership, of marking what was his, and when Eleanor tried to run, he caught her wrist and pulled her back into the shadows. The blade was cold against her cheek, then burning hot as it carved a deliberate line from her temple to her jaw. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the howling wind outside. He marked her again, across her collarbone, down her left arm, each cut precise and purposeful. When he finally released her, blood streaming down her face and soaking into her cotton dress, he whispered the words that would haunt her for months to come. "No man will ever want you now. You are mine, even if you refuse me. Every time you look in a mirror, you will remember that you belong to Jacob Pritchard." But Jacob had miscalculated. Eleanor's father found her before dawn, unconscious and bleeding in the hay. The doctor came quickly, stitching her wounds with careful hands, but the scars remained, angry red lines that mapped her skin like a cruel cartographer's work. Jacob disappeared before the sheriff could arrest him, vanishing into the wild Nevada desert like smoke. Some said he headed toward California. Others claimed he had been killed by bandits on the road. Eleanor did not care which story was true, as long as he never returned. The months that followed were harder than the night of the attack. Eleanor healed, but Silverton's judgment cut deeper than any knife. Women whispered behind gloved hands when she walked to the general store. Men averted their eyes, uncomfortable with her disfigurement. The few suitors who had once called on her father stopped coming. Eleanor felt herself becoming invisible, a ghost in her own town, defined entirely by the violence that had been done to her. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, owned a modest cattle ranch on the outskirts of Silverton. He was a good man, weathered by years of hard work and the loss of Eleanor's mother to fever when Eleanor was just 12. After the attack, he became fiercely protective, rarely letting Eleanor out of his sight. But Eleanor could see the worry in his eyes, the unspoken fear that she would spend the rest of her life alone, trapped by the scars that Jacob had carved into her flesh. By late autumn, Eleanor had resigned herself to this fate. She worked alongside her father, tending the cattle, mending fences, cooking meals in their small ranch house. She avoided mirrors and kept her hair long, letting it fall across her face to hide the worst of the scarring. She told herself she did not need love, did not need a husband. She would be content with the quiet life she had built, even if it felt like living in a tomb. Then, on a crisp October morning, a stranger rode into their lives and changed everything. Eleanor was in the barn, mucking out the stalls when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She tensed, her heart racing the way it always did when someone unexpected arrived. Through the open barn door, she watched as a man dismounted from a tall chestnut mare. He was lean and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather chaps and a dark hat that shadowed his face. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Thomas emerged from the house to greet him, and Eleanor strained to hear their conversation over the snorting of the horses. "Name's Caleb Morrison," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. "I heard in town you might be looking for a ranch hand. I have experience with cattle, horses, and general repairs. I can work hard and I do not cause trouble." Thomas studied him for a long moment. They were short-handed, that much was true. Their last ranch hand had left 2 months ago to try his luck in the California gold fields, and Thomas was not getting any younger. Eleanor could see him weighing the decision. "Where are you coming from?" Thomas asked. "Wyoming, originally," Caleb replied. "I have been working ranches across the territory for the past few years, most recently down in Arizona, but I wanted to head north before winter set in." You have references? Caleb reached into his saddlebag and produced a worn envelope. Thomas opened it, scanning the letters inside. Eleanor could not see his expression, but after a moment he nodded. Pay is not much, but you get room and board. There is a bunkhouse out back. It is clean and the roof does not leak. That sounds fine, sir. They shook hands and Eleanor watched as Caleb led his horse toward the barn. She quickly turned back to her work, not wanting to be caught staring. But when Caleb entered the barn, he stopped, and she felt his gaze on her. She kept her head down, her hair falling like a curtain across her scarred cheek. "Afternoon," Caleb said. Eleanor mumbled a greeting, not looking up. "I am Caleb. I will be working here now." "Eleanor," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and she expected him to leave to take his horse to one of the empty stalls. Instead, he stepped closer. "Do you need help with that?" he asked, gesturing to the heavy wheelbarrow she had been filling with soiled hay. "I can manage," Eleanor said quickly. "I am sure you can," Caleb replied, and there was no condescension in his tone, only genuine respect. "But I am here now, so you might as well put me to work." Eleanor risked a glance up at him. He was looking at her directly, his eyes a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She waited for his gaze to drop to her scars, for the flicker of discomfort or pity that always followed. But Caleb's expression did not change. He simply waited, patient and calm. "All right," Eleanor said slowly. "You can take that wheelbarrow out to the compost heap. It is behind the barn." Caleb nodded and took the handles, lifting the wheelbarrow with ease. As he walked past her, he paused. "Nice to meet you, Eleanor," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her standing alone in the barn with her heart beating strangely fast. Over the following weeks, Caleb proved himself to be an excellent ranch hand. He rose before dawn, worked tirelessly through the day, and never complained. Thomas was clearly pleased with the arrangement, and the ranch ran more smoothly than it had in months. Eleanor found herself crossing paths with Caleb often, whether she was feeding the chickens or bringing lunch out to the men working in the far pasture. What struck her most was the way Caleb treated her. He did not stare at her scars, but neither did he make a show of ignoring them. He simply spoke to her as he would anyone else, asking her opinion on the horses, or commenting on the weather, or sharing a story from his travels. He had a quiet sense of humor, dry and unexpected, that made Eleanor smile despite herself. One afternoon, Eleanor was in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables before the first frost. Caleb approached, carrying a bucket of water from the well. "Your father said you might need this for washing the vegetables," he said. "Thank you," Eleanor said, accepting the bucket. She set it down and returned to pulling carrots from the earth. Caleb did not leave. Instead, he crouched down and began helping her, his hands quick and efficient. "You do not have to do that," Eleanor said. "You have your own work." "I finished early," Caleb replied. "Besides, I do not mind. I grew up on a farm. I have pulled more carrots than I can count." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden. Eleanor stole glances at Caleb, noticing the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the strong line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Why did you come to Nevada?" Eleanor asked suddenly. Caleb looked up, surprised by the question. "I needed a change," he said after a moment. "I have been drifting for a while, looking for a place that felt like it could be home. And does this feel like home?" Caleb's gaze met hers, and there was something in his eyes that made Eleanor's breath catch. "It is starting to," he said quietly. Eleanor looked away, her cheeks flushing. She told herself it meant nothing, that Caleb was simply being kind. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed, she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, as if she were something precious rather than broken. As winter approached, the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, the barn was insulated against the cold, and firewood was stacked high beside the house. Eleanor and Caleb fell into an easy partnership, working side by side on countless tasks. Thomas noticed, of course, but he said nothing, only watched with a thoughtful expression. One evening in late November, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it sheets of icy rain and howling winds. Eleanor was in the barn, making sure the animals were secure when Caleb appeared, drenched and shivering. "The bunkhouse roof is leaking," he said, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "I will be fine, but I wanted to check that everything here was tied down." "You cannot stay in the bunkhouse if it is leaking," Eleanor said, alarmed. "You will freeze." "I have weathered worse," Caleb said with a shrug. "That is not the point." Eleanor made a decision. "Come inside, we have a spare room. It is small, but it is warm and dry." Caleb hesitated. "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. My father will insist on it as well." Thomas did indeed insist, and within the hour, Caleb was settled in the small room off the kitchen, his wet clothes hanging by the fire to dry. Eleanor made coffee and heated up leftover stew, and the three of them sat around the table, listening to the storm rage outside. "This reminds me of a storm I weathered in Wyoming," Caleb said, wrapping his hands around his mug. "I was helping drive cattle through the mountains when a blizzard hit. We lost sight of each other in the snow, and I ended up spending the night in a cave with my horse. I thought for sure I would freeze to death, but we huddled together and somehow made it through." "How did you find your way back?" Eleanor asked. "I did not," Caleb said with a wry smile. "The other men found me the next morning. I was half buried in a snowdrift and my horse was standing over me like a guardian. They said I was lucky to be alive." "You must have a guardian angel," Thomas said. Caleb's smile faded slightly. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I am just too stubborn to die." There was a weight to his words, a hint of something darker beneath the surface. Eleanor wanted to ask more, to understand the shadows that sometimes crossed Caleb's face, but she held her tongue. Everyone had secrets, and she was not one to pry. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them all inside. Eleanor found herself spending more time with Caleb, playing cards in the evening, reading aloud from her small collection of books, or simply sitting by the fire and talking. She learned that he was 24, that his parents had died when he was young, and that he had been on his own for most of his life. He spoke of the places he had been, the people he had met, the beauty and brutality of life on the frontier. In turn, Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told Caleb about her mother, about the loneliness of growing up without her. She spoke of her love for the ranch, for the animals and the land, and how she had once dreamed of having a family of her own. She did not speak of Jacob or the scars, but Caleb seemed to understand that there were wounds deeper than the ones visible on her skin. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Caleb asked the question Eleanor had been dreading. "What happened to you?" They were alone in the kitchen, Thomas having gone to bed early. Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her cheek, tracing the long scar that ran from temple to jaw. "I do not talk about it," she said quietly. "You do not have to," Caleb said. "But I want you to know that I am here if you ever want to." Eleanor looked at him, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and something inside her cracked. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "There was a man, Jacob Pritchard. He wanted to marry me, but I refused. He did not take it well." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "He said if he could not have me, no one else would either, so he made sure of it." Caleb's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "Where is he now?" "Gone. He ran after he did this. No one knows where." "If I ever find him," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous, "he will regret what he did to you." Eleanor shook her head. "It does not matter anymore. The damage is done. I have accepted that I will spend my life alone. No man wants a woman who looks like I do." Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to where Eleanor sat and knelt down beside her, his eyes level with hers. "He was wrong," Caleb said fiercely. "Jacob Pritchard was wrong. These scars do not define you. They do not make you less beautiful or less worthy of love." Eleanor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. You do not understand. People look at me and they only see the scars. They see what was done to me, not who I am." "Then they are fools," Caleb said. He reached out slowly, giving Eleanor time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her scarred cheek, tracing the line with a tenderness that made Eleanor's breath hitch. "I see you, Eleanor. I see your strength, your kindness, your courage. I see a woman who has survived something terrible and refused to be broken by it. And when I look at you, I see someone beautiful." Eleanor could not hold back the tears any longer. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast, and Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. It was the first time since the attack that Eleanor had allowed herself to truly grieve, to feel the full weight of what had been done to her. And Caleb held her through it all, his presence steady and unwavering. When the tears finally subsided, Eleanor pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not apologize," Caleb said. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Eleanor looked up at him, at the warmth in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The following week, the weather cleared, and life on the ranch returned to normal. But something had changed between Eleanor and Caleb. There was a new awareness, a tension that hummed in the air whenever they were near each other. Eleanor caught Caleb watching her when he thought she was not looking, and she found herself seeking him out, finding excuses to be near him. Thomas noticed, of course. One evening, as Eleanor was washing dishes, he came up beside her and spoke quietly. "Caleb is a good man," he said. Eleanor's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I know, he cares for you. Anyone can see it." Eleanor bit her lip, unsure how to respond. "I care for him too," she admitted, "but I do not know if that is enough." "Why would it not be? Because of what I am now, because of what Jacob did to me." Thomas sighed and placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Jacob Pritchard tried to destroy you, but he failed. You are still the same strong, beautiful woman you always were, and if Caleb cannot see that, then he is not the man I think he is. But I believe he does see it. I believe he sees you more clearly than you see yourself." Eleanor turned to her father, tears in her eyes. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes the best things in life require us to be brave." That night, Eleanor lay awake, her father's words echoing in her mind. She thought about Caleb, about the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel seen and valued. She thought about the life she had resigned herself to, lonely and small, and she realized she did not want that anymore. She wanted more. She wanted Caleb. The next morning, Eleanor woke with a sense of purpose. She found Caleb in the barn, repairing a broken stall door. He looked up when she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Eleanor replied. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Caleb, can we talk?" "Of course." He set down his tools and gave her his full attention. Eleanor twisted her hands together, suddenly nervous. "I have been thinking about what you said the other night, about how you see me." "I meant every word," Caleb said quietly. "I believe you. But I need you to understand something. These scars are not going away. They are a part of me now, and they always will be. If you care for me, you are caring for someone who has been damaged, someone who might always carry this pain." Caleb stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Eleanor, everyone carries pain. Everyone has scars, whether they are visible or not. Yours happen to be on the outside, but that does not make them any more defining than the scars I carry inside." "What do you mean?" Caleb looked away, his jaw working. "I told you my parents died when I was young. What I did not tell you is how. My father was a drunk. One night he came home angry and looking for a fight. My mother tried to calm him down, but he hit her. I was 12 and I tried to stop him. He turned on me and we fought. In the struggle, he fell and hit his head. He died instantly." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Caleb." "My mother never forgave me. She said I killed him, that it was my fault. She sent me away to live with relatives who did not want me. I have spent my whole life carrying the guilt of that night, the knowledge that I took a life, even if it was an accident. So when I say I understand pain, I mean it. I understand what it is like to be marked by something you had no control over." Eleanor reached out and took Caleb's hand, squeezing it tightly. "It was not your fault. You were protecting your mother, maybe, but it does not change what happened." Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "The point is, we all have things we wish we could change about ourselves, about our pasts. But those things do not have to define us. We can choose to move forward to build something new." "Together?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb smiled, a slow, tender smile that made Eleanor's heart race. "If you will have me." Eleanor did not answer with words. Instead, she stepped forward and kissed him, pouring all of her hope and fear and longing into that single gesture. Caleb responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her close. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper, more urgent. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I will take that as a yes," Caleb said, his voice rough. Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy that she had not made in months. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Caleb." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, and for the first time since the attack, Eleanor felt whole. She felt like herself again, not the broken, scarred woman that Jacob had tried to create, but the strong, hopeful woman she had always been. Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Caleb's relationship blossomed. They were careful not to flaunt their affection in front of Thomas, but he gave them his blessing, pleased to see his daughter happy again. They spent their evenings together, talking and dreaming about the future. Caleb spoke of his desire to own his own ranch someday, a place where he could put down roots and build a life. Eleanor shared her own dreams of having a family, of filling their home with love and laughter. But their happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that Jacob Pritchard was still out there, somewhere. Eleanor tried not to think about him, but sometimes late at night she would wake from nightmares, reliving the attack. Caleb was always there to comfort her, holding her until the fear subsided. In early December, a stranger rode into Silverton with news that sent shockwaves through the town. Jacob Pritchard had been spotted in a mining camp near Virginia City, just 50 miles to the north. He had been using a false name, but someone had recognized him and sent word to the sheriff. When Thomas brought the news home, Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "What is the sheriff going to do?" she asked. "He is organizing a posse to go after him," Thomas said. "He wants to bring Jacob back to face justice." Caleb stood abruptly. "I am going with them." "No," Eleanor said, fear gripping her heart. "It is too dangerous." "I have to," Caleb said, his voice firm. "He hurt you, Eleanor. He needs to pay for what he did." "I do not care about revenge. I care about you. I cannot lose you." Caleb knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You will not lose me, I promise. But I need to do this, not just for you, but for myself. I need to know that he can never hurt you again." Eleanor wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, but she could see the determination in his eyes. She knew that once Caleb made up his mind, there was no changing it. "Then come back to me," she whispered. "Promise me you will come back." "I promise," Caleb said, and he kissed her, long and deep, as if trying to memorize the feel of her. The next morning, Caleb rode out with the sheriff and 5 other men. Eleanor watched him go, her heart heavy with dread. Thomas tried to reassure her, but she could not shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. The days that followed were the longest of Eleanor's life. She threw herself into work, trying to keep her mind occupied, but every sound, every shadow made her jump. She found herself praying, something she had not done since her mother died, begging God to keep Caleb safe. On the 5th day, riders appeared on the horizon. Eleanor ran out to meet them, her heart pounding. She counted the horses, relief flooding through her when she saw that all 7 men had returned, and there, at the center of the group, bound and gagged, was Jacob Pritchard. Caleb dismounted and went straight to Eleanor, pulling her into his arms. "It is over," he said. "He is going to stand trial." Eleanor looked past him to Jacob, who was glaring at her with undisguised hatred. She felt a flicker of fear, but then Caleb squeezed her hand, grounding her. "He cannot hurt you anymore," Caleb said. "I will not let him." Jacob was taken to the jailhouse in Silverton, and the trial was set for the following week. The whole town turned out for it, eager to see justice served. Eleanor was called to testify, and though it was one of the hardest things she had ever done, she stood before the court and told her story. She spoke of the attack, of the scars, of the months of pain and isolation that followed. And when she was done, she looked Jacob straight in the eye and said the words she had been holding inside for so long. "You tried to break me. You tried to make me believe that I was worthless, that no one would ever want me. But you were wrong. I am not broken. I am stronger than I ever was before. And I have found someone who loves me, scars and all. You failed, Jacob, you failed." The courtroom erupted in applause, and Jacob's face twisted with rage. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding him guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, and as he was led away, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was truly over. Jacob could never hurt her again. That evening, Caleb took Eleanor for a walk along the ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They stood together, watching the light fade, and Caleb turned to Eleanor, his expression serious. "There is something I need to ask you," he said. Eleanor's heart began to race. "What is it?" Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring, delicate and beautiful. "Eleanor Whitmore, I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are loved. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Eleanor felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. They stood there on the ridge, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They were married in the spring of 1877 in a small ceremony at the ranch. Thomas walked Eleanor down the makeshift aisle, beaming with pride. The whole town was invited, and to Eleanor's surprise, most of them came. The same people who had whispered and stared now smiled and offered their congratulations. Eleanor realized that she had been the one hiding, the one allowing the scars to define her. Now that she stood tall and proud, refusing to be ashamed, others saw her differently too. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Caleb looked impossibly handsome in his best suit, his eyes never leaving Eleanor as she approached. When it came time for the vows, Caleb took Eleanor's hands and spoke from the heart. "Eleanor, you have taught me that love is not about perfection. It is about acceptance, about seeing someone for who they truly are and choosing them anyway. I choose you, today and every day for the rest of my life. I promise to stand by you, to protect you, to love you with everything I have." Eleanor wiped away tears as she responded. "Caleb, you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. You gave me hope. You showed me that I am worthy of love, that my scars do not define me. I promise to stand by you, to support you, to love you with all my heart. You are my home." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Eleanor deeply, and the crowd erupted in cheers. It was a moment of pure, unbridled joy, and Eleanor felt as if she were floating. The reception was held in the barn, which had been decorated with wildflowers and lanterns. There was music and dancing, and Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in years. Caleb never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her out in the crowd. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Caleb pulled Eleanor aside. They walked out into the night, away from the noise and light, until they were alone under the vast Nevada sky. "I have something I want to do," Caleb said quietly. "What is it?" Caleb reached up and gently moved Eleanor's hair away from her face, exposing the long scar on her cheek. Then, slowly and deliberately, he leaned in and kissed it. His lips were soft and warm, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "He scarred me so no one else would want me," Eleanor whispered, the words trembling. "Then I will spend the rest of my life proving him wrong," Caleb murmured against her skin. He kissed the scar again, then moved to the one on her collarbone, pressing his lips against it with the same tenderness. He continued, tracing every scar with kisses, taking his time, worshipping each mark as if it were precious. Eleanor closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance pouring from Caleb. She had spent so long hating these scars, seeing them as symbols of her brokenness. But in Caleb's hands, under his lips, they became something else entirely. They became proof of her survival, her strength, her capacity to endure and overcome. When Caleb finally finished, he pulled back and looked into Eleanor's eyes. "You are perfect to me," he said. "Every part of you." Eleanor kissed him then, pouring all of her gratitude and love into the gesture. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, two broken people who had found wholeness in each other. Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and deep contentment. Caleb and Eleanor worked the ranch alongside Thomas, expanding the herd and making improvements to the property. They saved every penny, dreaming of the day when they could buy their own land. But more than that, they built a life together, filled with small moments of joy and tenderness. Eleanor discovered that marriage to Caleb was everything she had hoped for and more. He was patient and kind, always ready with a smile or a word of encouragement. He never made her feel less than, never treated her scars as something to be hidden or ashamed of. Instead, he celebrated her strength, her resilience, and Eleanor found herself growing more confident with each passing day. In the summer of 1878, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a new life into the world was daunting. What if she was not a good mother? What if her child was ashamed of her scars? Caleb dispelled her fears with characteristic confidence. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "And our child is going to be so lucky to have you." As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, Caleb became even more attentive, refusing to let her do any heavy work and constantly fussing over her. It drove Eleanor a little crazy, but she loved him for it. Thomas was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and he spent his evenings whittling toys and building a cradle. In the spring of 1879, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Caleb Morrison, after both his grandfather and his father. The birth was long and difficult, but when Eleanor finally held her son in her arms, all the pain disappeared. He was perfect, with Caleb's dark hair and Eleanor's green eyes. Caleb was a doting father from the start. He would spend hours holding Thomas, talking to him, singing off-key lullabies. Eleanor would watch them together, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. As Thomas grew, it became clear that he had inherited his parents' best qualities. He was curious and fearless, always exploring, always asking questions. He adored his mother, and Eleanor's fears about him being ashamed of her scars proved unfounded. To Thomas, his mother's scars were just another part of her, no more significant than the color of her hair or the sound of her laugh. When Thomas was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident, more prepared. In the winter of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter whom they named Rose, after Eleanor's mother. Rose was a quiet, contemplative baby, content to watch the world with wide, thoughtful eyes. With 2 young children and a growing ranch, life was busier than ever. But Eleanor and Caleb thrived on the challenge. They had finally saved enough money to purchase a piece of land adjacent to Thomas Whitmore's ranch, and they began building their own homestead. It was hard work, but every nail they hammered, every board they laid brought them closer to their dream. By 1883, their homestead was complete. It was a modest 2-story house with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. Eleanor planted a garden, and Caleb built a larger barn to house their growing herd. Thomas Whitmore divided his cattle between the 2 ranches, and the Morrison Ranch began to prosper. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor divided her time between caring for the children and helping Caleb with the ranch. She loved the work, loved the feeling of the sun on her face and the soil under her fingernails. She loved the life they had built together, from nothing but hope and determination. The scars that had once seemed like the end of her story became just one chapter among many. Eleanor rarely thought about them anymore, except when Caleb would trace them with his fingers or his lips, reminding her that she was loved exactly as she was. In the fall of 1885, Thomas Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 72 years old, and he had lived long enough to see his grandchildren grow and his daughter thrive. Eleanor grieved deeply, but she took comfort in knowing that her father had spent his final years happy and surrounded by family. They buried him on a hill overlooking both ranches, and Eleanor would often take the children to visit his grave, telling them stories about their grandfather. Thomas had left his ranch to Eleanor, and she and Caleb merged the two properties, creating one of the most successful cattle operations in the region. As the years passed, Thomas and Rose grew into capable young adults. Thomas inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. He was patient and thoughtful, always considering the consequences of his actions. Rose was more spirited, with a quick wit and a talent for healing. She spent her time learning about herbs and medicine from the town doctor, and it became clear that she had found her calling. In 1890, when Thomas was 11 and Rose was 9, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1891, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Daniel. The twins were a handful from the start, full of energy and mischief. But they brought new life and laughter to the ranch, and Eleanor and Caleb found themselves enjoying parenthood all over again, albeit with a bit more exhaustion this time around. One evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch watching the twins play in the yard, Caleb came and sat beside her. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Regret what? This life? The ranch, the children, me?" Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "Never. Why would you ask that?" Caleb shrugged, his eyes distant. "I think about where you might have ended up if Jacob had never hurt you. Maybe you would have married someone else, someone better, someone who could have given you an easier life." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Caleb Morrison, you listen to me. I would not change a single thing about my life. Yes, what Jacob did was terrible, and yes, it was painful, but it brought me to you. And you have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more. You have given me love, a family, a home. You have given me a life worth living." Caleb smiled, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together in the fading light, watching their children play, and Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life had not been easy, but it had been full. Full of love, full of joy, full of meaning. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county. Rose went east to study medicine, one of the first women in Nevada to do so, and eventually returned to open a clinic in Silverton. The twins, Samuel and Daniel, took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch as Caleb and Eleanor grew older. In 1905, Caleb and Eleanor celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But their love had only deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable. On their anniversary, Caleb surprised Eleanor with a trip to the ridge where he had proposed all those years ago. They rode up on horseback, just as they had done so many times before, and stood together watching the sunset. "I have been thinking about that night," Caleb said, his arm around Eleanor's waist. "The night you told me about Jacob, about what he did to you." "Why?" Eleanor asked. "Because I want you to know that I meant what I said then, and I mean it even more now. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I thank God every day that I found you. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me, Caleb, not from Jacob, but from myself. You taught me that I was worth loving, that my scars did not define me. You gave me the courage to live again." "We saved each other," Caleb said softly. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. Gently, reverently, he kissed the scar on her cheek, just as he had done on their wedding night so many years ago. Eleanor closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of her love for this man. He had kept his promise, spending his life proving that she was wanted, that she was cherished. And in doing so, he had healed wounds that went far deeper than any scar. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Eleanor and Caleb stood together on the ridge, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would last forever. In 1912, when Eleanor was 55 and Caleb was 58, they decided to hand over the full operation of the ranch to Samuel and Daniel. They had earned their rest, and they wanted to spend their remaining years enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They built a smaller house on the property, just big enough for the two of them, with a porch swing and a garden. Eleanor spent her days tending her flowers and visiting with her children and grandchildren. Caleb took up woodworking, crafting beautiful pieces of furniture that became family heirlooms. They would often sit together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had tamed together. Caleb would hold Eleanor's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm, and they would talk about their lives, their family, their blessings. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Eleanor said one evening. "Neither did I," Caleb replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," Eleanor echoed, smiling. As they aged, their love only grew stronger. They faced the challenges of growing older together, supporting each other through aches and pains and the inevitable slowing down. But they never lost their sense of humor, their deep affection for each other, or their gratitude for the life they had built. In 1920, Caleb fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor did what he could, and Rose came home from her clinic to care for her father, but it became clear that Caleb was not going to recover. Eleanor sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, telling him stories, reminding him of all the good times they had shared. On a quiet morning in late autumn, with Eleanor at his side, Caleb passed away peacefully. He was 66 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life. Eleanor grieved deeply, feeling as if a part of her had been torn away. But she took comfort in knowing that Caleb had died surrounded by love, and that he had never doubted, even for a moment, that he was cherished. Eleanor lived for another 10 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She remained sharp and spirited until the end, always ready with a story or a word of advice. She spoke often of Caleb, keeping his memory alive through her words and her love. In the spring of 1930, at the age of 73, Eleanor passed away in her sleep. Her family buried her beside Caleb on the hill overlooking the ranch, and they carved a simple epitaph on her headstone. "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was strong, she was brave, and she was loved." The Morrison Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations. And though the people of Silverton eventually forgot the story of Jacob Pritchard and the scars he inflicted, the descendants of Eleanor and Caleb Morrison never did. They told the story to their children and their children's children, a tale of love conquering hate, of healing and hope, of a cowboy who saw beyond the scars to the beautiful soul beneath. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, some say you can still see them there on the ridge, two spirits standing hand in hand, their love eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the power of acceptance and the healing touch of true love. Eleanor's story became a legend in the family, passed down as a reminder that scars, whether physical or emotional, do not have to define a person. Her strength and resilience inspired generations of Morrison women to stand tall and proud, to refuse to be victims, to believe in their own worth. and Caleb's devotion became the standard by which all Morrison men measured themselves. To love like Caleb loved Eleanor, unconditionally and completely, seeing past flaws and imperfections to the person beneath, became the family's greatest aspiration. The ranch house that Caleb built with his own hands still stands today, lovingly maintained by his descendants. And in the parlor, hanging above the fireplace, is a photograph of Eleanor and Caleb, taken on their 25th wedding anniversary. In the photograph, Eleanor is smiling, her scarred cheek turned toward the camera without shame, and Caleb is looking at her with an expression of pure adoration. It is a powerful image, a testament to a love that refused to be broken, and it serves as a reminder to all who see it that true beauty lies not in perfection, but in courage, in resilience, and in the willingness to love and be loved exactly as you are. The scars that Jacob Pritchard carved into Eleanor's skin were meant to destroy her, to mark her as broken and unwanted. But instead, they became a symbol of her strength, a map of her survival, and ultimately the canvas upon which Caleb painted his love. Every kiss he pressed against those scars was a declaration, a promise, a healing touch that transformed pain into beauty and shame into pride. Eleanor's life was not defined by what was done to her, but by what she chose to do in response. She chose courage over fear, hope over despair, love over bitterness. And in doing so, she created a legacy that lasted far beyond her own lifetime, inspiring countless others to see their own scars not as marks of shame, but as badges of honor, proof that they survived, that they endured, that they overcame. And at the center of it all was Caleb, the cowboy who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her not in spite of her scars, but as a whole person whose scars were just one part of her story. His love was the catalyst that transformed her pain into power, his acceptance the foundation upon which she rebuilt her life. Their story is a reminder that healing is not about erasing the past or pretending that pain never happened. It is about finding someone who sees your wounds and does not turn away, who traces your scars with tenderness and declares them beautiful, who loves you not as you wish you were, but as you truly are. It is about refusing to let cruelty and violence have the final word, choosing instead to write a new chapter, one filled with love and hope, and the courage to believe that you are worthy of happiness. In the end, Jacob Pritchard failed. He tried to mark Eleanor as his to ensure that no one else would want her. But he succeeded only in creating a surface that Caleb would worship, scars that became sacred under the touch of true love. Eleanor found not just acceptance, but celebration, not just tolerance, but adoration. She found a man who saw her scars and thought them beautiful because they were a part of her, and she was everything he had ever wanted. This is the story of Eleanor and Caleb Morrison, a love story born in the Wild West, forged in pain and tempered by grace. It is a story of survival and redemption, of two broken people who found wholeness in each other. And though they are both long gone now, their love lives on, woven into the very fabric of the land they tamed together, whispered on the desert wind, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the transformative power of love. Their descendants still gather on that ridge at sunset, especially on anniversaries and special occasions. They stand where Eleanor and Caleb stood so many times, looking out over the land that 4 generations have now called home. And they tell the story again, making sure that the youngest ones understand where they came from, what their family overcame, and the love that made it all possible. The Morrison Ranch has weathered droughts and economic downturns, wars and changing times. But it has endured, just as Eleanor endured, just as the love between Eleanor and Caleb endured. It stands as a monument to the power of perseverance, to the strength that comes from choosing love even when hate seems easier, to the beauty that can emerge from pain if we are brave enough to believe in healing. And somewhere, in the space between memory and legend, Eleanor and Caleb still dance under the Nevada stars, his arms around her waist, her head on his shoulder. both of them smiling with the contentment of two souls who found exactly what they were looking for in each other. The scars are there still, but they do not matter, have never mattered because Caleb's love transformed them into something precious, something sacred, something that tells not a story of violation but of victory. "He scarred me so no one else would want me," Eleanor had said, her voice breaking with pain and shame. And Caleb had answered with his lips, with his hands, with his whole heart, tracing every scar with kisses, proving again and again that she was wanted, that she was loved, that she was beautiful, scars and all, now and forever in this life and whatever came after. This is their story, and it is a story of hope.